Most men don't break down in some dramatic, movie-like moment where everything collapses at once. It's quieter than that, almost polite. It happens in small, forgettable pieces. A late bill that gets paid without thinking. A cup of coffee that goes cold because nobody really had time to sit and taste it. A long look at the phone screen while standing at a red light, even though the light has already turned green and someone behind is tapping the horn. Not angry, just tired too. And if you ask them, they'll tell you they're fine. Of course they're fine. They're working, they're surviving, they're doing what needs to be done. That's the script, right? You grow up, you get a job, you keep things moving. You don't complain unless something is seriously wrong. But here's the thing nobody likes to admit. Most men aren't exhausted because life is too heavy. They're exhausted because nothing changes. Day after day feels like a copy-paste job. Wake up before the sun, scroll through messages that don't matter, rush through breakfast like it's a pit stop, sit in traffic that doesn't move, stare at screens that never blink back, go home when it's already dark, eat something quick, and then fall into the same chair, the same position, the same endless scroll. And somewhere in between all that, something inside them goes quiet. Not dead, just quiet enough that they stop noticing it. You ever sit in a crowded place and realize nobody is really there? Not really. Everyone's physically present, sure, but their minds are somewhere else, thinking about deadlines, thinking about money, thinking about what they should have done 5 years ago, thinking about nothing at all because thinking itself has become tiring. That's the modern routine. It looks busy from the outside, but inside, it's empty space filled with noise. And the strange part is, nobody questions it. It's almost respected. If you say you're tired, people nod. If you say you're busy, people understand. But if you say you feel stuck, really stuck, they don't know what to do with that. Because stuck doesn't sound productive. Stuck doesn't fit into a calendar. So men learn to translate that feeling into something more acceptable. I'm just tired. Work's been crazy. Just need a break. But a break from what? From a life that doesn't feel like it belongs to you anymore? You see it in small habits. The way someone checks their phone the second there's silence, like silence itself is dangerous. The way a man opens 5 different apps in 10 minutes and closes all of them without remembering why he opened them in the first place. The way he sits on the edge of his bed at night, not ready to sleep, not willing to do anything else either, just stuck in between. And the scary part is, this doesn't feel like a crisis. It feels normal. That's how deep it goes. It becomes routine. Like brushing your teeth or locking the door before you leave. You don't question it anymore. You just live inside it. There's this unspoken agreement in society. You don't dig too deep. You don't ask too many questions about meaning or direction unless something breaks. As long as you're functioning, you're fine. But functioning isn't the same as living. It's just maintaining. Like keeping an old machine running with duct tape and quiet hope that it doesn't fall apart today. And over time, that kind of living does something to a man. It doesn't crush him all at once. It wears him down slowly, like water dripping on stone. You won't notice it in a day, maybe not even in a year, but give it time. And suddenly you wake up and realize you've been on autopilot for longer than you can remember. You start measuring your life in weeks. Just get through this week, then it becomes months. After this project, things will calm down, then years. Maybe next year I'll figure things out. And somewhere along the way, that next year becomes a habit, not a plan. You postpone your own life without even realizing it. Not because you're weak, not because you lack ambition, but because you've been trained to prioritize everything else first. Responsibility comes before curiosity. Stability comes before exploration. And before you know it, you don't even remember what you used to be curious about. That part of you, the one that wanted to try things, to fail, to look stupid, to learn something new just because it felt interesting. It gets buried under schedules and expectations. Not gone, just buried deep enough that it stops making noise. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Because if you slow down for a second, really slow down, and ask yourself a simple question, when was the last time I did something for the first time? Most men won't have an answer ready. Not a real one. Not something beyond the surface. And that silence, that pause before answering, says more than any long explanation ever could. It's not that opportunities don't exist. They're everywhere. In books that never get opened, in gyms that get visited twice and forgotten, in conversations that never happen because it's easier to stay quiet, in skills that could be learned but get postponed because there's no time. But time isn't the real issue. We all get the same 24 hours. The difference is what we do when we're not being watched, what we choose when there's no pressure, when there's no reward, just a moment and a decision. And most of the time, the decision is comfort. Not because comfort is bad, but because it's easy, predictable, safe. You know what you're getting. No surprises, no risk of failure, but also no growth. And that trade-off happens so quietly, you don't even feel it. You just wake up one day and realize you've been choosing the easier path for so long, you forgot there was another option. So you keep going. You keep repeating the same cycle. You tell yourself this is just how life works. You convince yourself that excitement is for younger people, that trying new things is a luxury, that routine is maturity. And maybe part of that is true. Routine does bring stability, but too much of it, without variation, without challenge, without something that pushes back against you, it turns life into something flat, something predictable in the worst way, like listening to the same song on repeat until you don't hear it anymore. And that's where most men are. Not in pain, not in crisis, just numb enough to keep going. And numbness is dangerous because it doesn't force change. Pain does. Pain makes you react. But numbness? It lets you stay exactly where you are. Comfortable, functional, quietly disconnected. And the world doesn't stop for that. Bills still come. Work still demands. People still expect. So you keep moving. You keep playing your role. You keep showing up. But deep down, there's this question that starts to grow, slowly, patiently, like something waiting for the right moment. Is this it? Not in a dramatic way, not in a desperate way, just a simple, honest question. Is this all there is? And most men don't answer it, not because they can't, but because answering it would require them to look at their life without filters, without excuses, without the usual distractions. And that kind of honesty, it's rare, it's uncomfortable, it asks for change, real change, not the kind you announce on social media or promise yourself on January 1st. The kind that shows up in small decisions, quiet decisions, the kind nobody claps for, like choosing to do something different after a long day instead of collapsing into the same routine, like sitting in silence without reaching for your phone, like trying something new and being bad at it, on purpose. Those moments, they don't look important, but they are, because they break the pattern. And once the pattern cracks, even just a little, things start to shift. But before that happens, before any change, there's always this phase, this quiet realization that something isn't right. Not wrong enough to panic, but not right enough to ignore. And that's where the story begins. Not with action, not with transformation, but with awareness. A man standing in the middle of his own life, looking around, and for the first time, actually seeing it. Min didn't wake up one morning and decide to change his life. That's not how it happens, no matter what people like to say online. There was no clean starting line, no dramatic moment where everything suddenly made sense. It was a Tuesday, just another Tuesday that looked like every other Tuesday before it. The alarm went off at 6:30, not loud enough to shock him awake, just enough to remind him that sleep was over whether he liked it or not. He lay there for a few seconds, staring at the ceiling, not thinking anything in particular, just waiting for his body to catch up with the fact that the day had already started without him. Then his hand moved, almost by habit, reaching for the phone beside the bed. Notifications, messages, news, a few short videos, nothing important, but enough to fill the gap between sleep and responsibility. That gap, it used to be quiet, now it was crowded. He got up, moved through his morning like a routine he had memorized years ago. Brush teeth, wash face, change clothes, coffee brewing in the background, while he checked the time more than he needed to. The coffee wasn't bad, it just wasn't noticed. 2 or 3 quick sips, standing by the kitchen counter, eyes already somewhere else. By 7:15, he was out the door, stepping into the same street, the same line of motorbikes, the same low hum of a city already fully awake. Traffic didn't frustrate him anymore. That phase had passed. Now it was just part of the rhythm. Stop, move, stop again. He didn't even think about it. His body knew what to do. Red light meant check the phone. Green light meant move forward. It was almost efficient in a strange way, like even the waiting had been optimized. At work, nothing surprising happened. Emails, meetings, small talk that never went beyond safe topics. Busy today? Yeah, a bit. Same. Conversations that started and ended without leaving any trace. He did his job well enough. Not exceptional, not terrible. Reliable. That was the word people used. Reliable. It sounded like a compliment, but sometimes it felt like a quiet label. Something that boxed him in without asking. Lunch came and went. A quick meal with coworkers, half the time spent looking at screens, the other half talking about things that didn't matter by the time the plates were cleared. Afternoon dragged a little. It always did. Around 3 p.m., there was that familiar dip. Not exactly tired, not exactly awake, just somewhere in between. He would stretch in his chair, maybe walk to get another drink, glance out the window like something interesting might suddenly happen out there. It never did. By the time work ended, the sky had already started to dim. The ride home felt longer than the ride in, even though it was the same distance. Maybe because there was nothing waiting at the end of it except more of the same. Dinner was simple, something quick, something easy. He wasn't the kind of person who spent time cooking after a long day. The TV might be on, or maybe just silence with the soft glow of his phone lighting up his face. Video after video, story after story. Other people living lives that looked different. Not necessarily better, just different. That night, nothing unusual happened. No sudden realization. No moment where he threw his phone aside and said, "This needs to change." It was quieter than that. He was scrolling, like always, thumb moving without thinking, when he paused on a video of a guy lifting weights. Not a flashy video, no dramatic music, just a man in a small, cramped gym, sweat on his face, breathing heavy, lifting something that clearly pushed him to his limit. There was something about it, not the muscles, not the strength, just the effort. It looked real, tangible, like something you could measure. You either lifted the weight or you didn't. Simple, no gray area. Min watched for a few seconds longer than usual, then he scrolled past it. But something stayed, not a big thought, just a small itch in the back of his mind. Later that night, when the videos stopped feeling interesting and the silence started creeping back in, he sat there a little longer than usual. The room felt still, not peaceful, just still. His phone was in his hand, but he wasn't looking at it anymore. That's when he noticed it, the quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you aware of yourself in a way you usually avoid. He looked around his apartment, nothing wrong with it. Clean, organized, functional, but it didn't feel like anything. Just a place he existed in, not a place he lived in. He stood up, almost without thinking, and walked over to a corner where an old pair of dumbbells had been sitting for months, maybe longer. He didn't even remember when he bought them. Probably one of those moments where he thought he'd start something, and then didn't. They had a thin layer of dust on them. Not thick enough to be obvious, but enough to show they hadn't been touched. He bent down, picked one up. It felt heavier than he expected. Not because it was heavy, but because he hadn't used his body like that in a while. He stood there for a second, holding it, not really knowing what he was doing. Then he did a curl. Slow, awkward. The movement wasn't smooth. His arm shook a little at the top. He lowered it, then did it again. There was no plan, no workout routine, no goal, just movement. A few reps in, his breathing changed slightly. Nothing dramatic, just enough to notice. He switched arms. Same thing. Slight shake, slight effort. It wasn't impressive. Nobody was watching. If anything, it would look a bit ridiculous from the outside. A grown man standing in his living room, lifting dusty weights with no structure. But that wasn't the point. The point was, it felt different. Not better, not exciting, just different. And after a whole day of things feeling the same, that difference stood out. He put the dumbbells down after a few minutes. His arms felt a little heavier, his hands slightly tense. He sat back down, but he didn't pick up his phone right away. That was new. He just sat there, feeling the slight burn in his muscles, noticing his breath, the way his body felt more present. It wasn't a transformation. It didn't solve anything. Tomorrow would still come with the same alarm, the same traffic, the same office. But something small had shifted, a tiny interruption in the pattern. The next day, he didn't think about it much. The routine continued. Work, traffic, coffee, screens. But when he got home that evening, there was a moment, brief, almost easy to miss, where he glanced toward that corner again. The dumbbells were still there, same place, same quiet presence. He hesitated for a second, then he walked over. This time there was less hesitation. He picked them up, did a few more reps than the night before. Still no plan, still awkward, but slightly more familiar. Days passed like that, not every day. Some days he was too tired, some days he chose the couch instead. But the idea had been planted, and once something like that takes root, it doesn't disappear easily. It waits. It shows up in small moments, in choices that seem insignificant at the time. A few days later, he tried push-ups, on the floor, in his small living room, with no mat, no guidance. The first few were rough. His arms gave out faster than he expected. He lay there for a second, face close to the floor, breathing heavier than he thought he should be, for something so simple. It almost made him laugh. Almost. He pushed himself back up, tried again. Fewer reps this time, but he did them. And again, that feeling. Not pride, not excitement, just awareness. Like his body was waking up from something. Weeks went by, slowly, without any clear marker of progress. Some days he added a few more reps, some days he didn't. But something else started to change. His evenings felt less empty. Not full, but less empty. There was a difference. Instead of going straight from dinner to the couch, there was this small window where he chose to move, to do something. And that small window, it mattered more than he realized at the time. One weekend, he went for a run. Not because he had a plan, just because he wanted to see what it felt like. The first few minutes were uncomfortable. His breathing was uneven, his pace inconsistent. People passed him, some slower, some faster. He didn't care, or at least, he told himself he didn't. Halfway through, he considered stopping. His legs felt heavy, his chest tight, but he kept going. Not fast, not far, just forward. When he finally stopped, he bent over, hands on his knees, breathing hard. Sweat on his face, shirt slightly damp. It wasn't a long run, nothing impressive. But standing there, catching his breath, he felt something he hadn't felt in a while. Not happiness, not satisfaction. Something quieter, something steadier, like he had done something real, something that didn't involve a screen, didn't involve anyone else's expectations, just him and the effort. And that was enough to bring him back the next time. Not consistently, not perfectly, but enough to slowly, quietly change the direction of his evenings. For a while, Min believed he was making progress. Not the loud kind you post about, not the kind people notice, but something steady, something that felt honest. His evenings had shape now. His body felt a little more awake. His mind, slightly less foggy. And that alone was enough to convince him he was on the right track. But life has a way of testing whether you're actually changing, or just rearranging your comfort zone. Because it's easy to lift a weight in your living room when nobody's watching. It's easy to go for a run when you can stop whenever you want, when there's no consequence except your own judgment. It's controlled discomfort, safe discomfort, the kind that stays within your boundaries. The real test starts when those boundaries get pushed from the outside. It happens slowly, like most things do. A colleague at work mentioned a small public speaking meetup. Nothing big, just a group of people gathering after work to practice speaking in front of others. Min heard it in passing, half listening while finishing an email. "You should come sometime," the colleague said casually, like it wasn't a big deal. Min nodded. The way people nod when they already know they won't go. But the idea stayed, not loud, just present, like a background noise you can't fully ignore. For a few days he thought about it, then pushed it aside, then thought about it again. It didn't feel like lifting weights or running. Those things were private. This involved people, eyes, attention, judgment, even if nobody admitted it. One evening, after another session with the dumbbells, sitting there catching his breath, he felt that familiar quiet again, the same kind he had felt the first night. And in that quiet, the thought came back, clearer this time. He could ignore it, go back to the routine he had just started building, stay in that small, controlled bubble of improvement. Or he could step into something that didn't feel safe at all. The next day, without overthinking it too much, he showed up. The room was smaller than he expected, maybe 15 people, some chatting casually, some looking at their phones, some standing alone like they weren't sure what to do with their hands. Min stood near the back at first, observing. Always easier to observe. The session started simply. One by one, people went up, spoke for a few minutes about random topics. Nothing perfect. Some stumbled. Some spoke too fast. Some forgot what they wanted to say halfway through and laughed it off. It wasn't polished. It wasn't impressive. But it was exposed. Real. Then his name was called. He didn't remember signing up. Maybe he had. Maybe someone added him. It didn't matter. The moment was there now. No time to prepare. No time to think. He walked up slowly. Each step felt heavier than it should. His mind started racing. Not with ideas, but with noise. What if he messed up? What if he froze? What if people noticed how nervous he was? He stood in front of the group, turned around, faced them. And then, silence. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that presses against you. His throat felt dry. His hands, slightly tense. He opened his mouth to speak, and nothing came out for a second longer than it should have. It felt like time stretched just enough for everyone to notice. Then words came. Not smooth, not confident, but they came. Short sentences, pauses in the wrong places. A few moments where he lost his train of thought and had to restart. He could feel his heartbeat, louder than usual. But something interesting happened. Nobody laughed. Nobody interrupted. People listened. Not perfectly, not intensely, but enough. Enough for him to keep going. When his time was up, he stepped down, sat back in his seat, his body still tense, his mind replaying every mistake. The pauses, the awkward moments, the parts where his voice didn't sound like his own. It would have been easy to call it a failure, to say, this isn't for me, to go back to the things he was already comfortable with. But on the way home that night, something didn't sit right. It wasn't embarrassment, it wasn't pride either. It was something else, a realization that came quietly, like a thought that didn't need to be loud to be true. The discomfort he felt up there, it wasn't new, it had always been there. He had just been avoiding situations that exposed it. That's when things started to shift in a different way. Up until that point, Min thought he was building himself, improving, growing. But now, he started to see it differently. He wasn't building anything yet. He was uncovering things. Weaknesses he had learned to hide. Fears he had learned to work around. Patterns he had accepted as just the way he is. And the more he tried new things, the more those patterns showed up. When he tried learning guitar, his fingers didn't move the way he wanted. Simple chords felt complicated. His patience ran thin faster than he expected. He would stop, put the guitar down, tell himself he'd come back later, and sometimes he didn't. When he went running, there were days his mind quit before his body did. He would slow down, then walk, then stop. Even though physically he could have gone a bit further. And he knew it. That quiet voice inside, the one that says, that's enough. It wasn't always telling the truth. When he traveled alone for the first time, it wasn't freeing like people described. It was uncomfortable. Decisions felt heavier when there was no one to confirm them. Eating alone felt different when you noticed everyone else sitting in groups. The silence in a hotel room in a new city. It wasn't peaceful. It was loud in its own way. And one night, sitting there, he almost booked a flight back early. His finger hovered over the screen. It would have been easy. No one would judge him. No one would even know. But he didn't press it. Not because he was strong. Not because he had some deep motivation. Just because something in him recognized the pattern. The same pattern that had kept his life small, predictable, controlled. Avoid discomfort. Return to safety. Repeat. That's when the real twist settled in. It wasn't about adding new activities to his life. It wasn't about becoming more interesting or more skilled. It was about facing the parts of himself he had been quietly avoiding for years. And those parts, they didn't disappear just because he started doing push-ups or lifting weights. They followed him into every new thing he tried. Every challenge became a mirror, not showing him who he wanted to be, but who he actually was. Impatient, easily discouraged, afraid of looking foolish, quick to retreat when things got uncomfortable. Honest traits, human traits, but things he had never really looked at directly. And once you see those things clearly, you can't unsee them. That's what made it uncomfortable in a deeper way. Because now, when he chose to stop, he knew exactly why. It wasn't because he was tired. It wasn't because he didn't have time. It was because he didn't want to feel that discomfort, that exposure. That moment where you realize you're not as capable as you thought you were. And that realization, it changes things. It removes the excuses. It replaces them with something harder to deal with. Responsibility. Not the kind that comes from work or family, but the kind that comes from self-awareness. The kind where you see your own patterns clearly and have to decide whether to keep following them or not. Min didn't transform overnight after that. He still skipped workouts, still avoided certain situations, still chose comfort more often than he liked to admit. But the difference was, he noticed. Every time. And that awareness, it stayed with him. Quiet, persistent, like a voice that didn't shout, didn't judge, just reminded him. This is a choice. Every time you step back, it's a choice. Every time you avoid something that makes you uncomfortable, it's a choice. And once you realize that, life stops feeling like something that just happens to you. It starts to feel like something you're responsible for. Not in a heavy, overwhelming way, but in a clear, undeniable way. And that clarity, it's not comfortable, but it's real. There's a certain kind of silence you don't notice until it's too late to distract yourself from it. Not the kind you get when the power goes out or when the city briefly slows down after midnight. This one is different. It doesn't come from the outside. It comes from within. When all the usual noise you rely on suddenly isn't there to cover things up. Min found himself sitting in a small cafe one afternoon. The kind of place people walk into without thinking twice and leave without remembering. A few tables, faded walls. The air smelled like coffee that had been brewed too many times in the same machine. Nothing special, nothing memorable. He didn't plan to be there long, just a quick stop, maybe 10 minutes before heading somewhere else. But something about that day, it didn't follow his usual rhythm. He ordered a drink, sat down by the window, placed his phone on the table out of habit. The screen lit up for a second, then dimmed. No new notifications, no urgent messages, just a quiet screen reflecting a version of himself he wasn't used to looking at. For a moment, his hand moved slightly, almost reaching for it again. That reflex, it had been built over years, the need to fill every gap, every pause. But this time, he stopped. Not for any big reason, just stopped. Outside, the street moved like it always did. Motorbikes passing by, people crossing without looking up. A delivery driver checking his phone while balancing a bag on his shoulder. Life continuing at its usual pace. Inside, the cafe was quieter. A spoon tapping lightly against a glass at another table. Someone shifting in their seat. A chair scraping softly against the floor. Small sounds, easy to ignore. But without his phone, without that constant stream of distraction, those sounds became clearer, not louder, just more noticeable. Min leaned back slightly, eyes drifting without a fixed point. And that's when it started. Not a thought, not a clear idea, just a feeling. Subtle at first, like something rising slowly from a place he hadn't visited in a long time. He didn't try to analyze it, didn't try to name it. He just sat there, letting it be. Minutes passed, or maybe longer. Time felt different when you weren't measuring it with notifications and scrolling. His mind didn't rush the way it usually did. No jumping from one thing to another. Just a slow, steady unfolding. And in that space, things began to surface. Not dramatic memories, not big regrets. Just small, quiet observations. The kind that usually get pushed aside before they fully form. He saw himself, not physically but in pieces. Mornings that blurred into each other. Conversations that never went deeper than necessary. Evenings spent moving from one distraction to another without really choosing any of them. It wasn't painful. That's the strange part. If it had been painful, maybe he would have reacted, done something. But this was just clear. Like looking at a room with the lights fully on for the first time and realizing how everything is arranged. No judgment, just awareness. His fingers rested lightly on the table. No movement, no urge to reach for anything. And then, slowly, a thought formed. Simple, direct. If nothing changes, this is it. He didn't react to it immediately. Didn't push it away either. He just let it sit there. The words weren't loud. They didn't carry panic or urgency. They were calm, almost neutral. And that's what made them land deeper. Because they weren't trying to scare him. They were just true. He looked around again. Same cafe, same people. Same afternoon light coming through the window, casting soft shadows that shifted slightly as time passed. Everything was normal. Nothing had changed. But the way he saw it, that had shifted. He noticed how easy it would be to leave that cafe, go back to his routine, and let this moment fade like it never happened. It wouldn't take much. Just pick up the phone, check a few messages, scroll for a bit, and the feeling would be gone, replaced by noise, covered up. That's how it had always worked. But now, there was a pause, a space between the thought and the reaction. And in that space, he had a choice. Not a big, life-altering choice, just a small one. Stay with the silence, or escape it. He stayed, not out of discipline, not out of some deep intention, just curiosity. What happens if I don't run from this? The silence didn't get heavier. It didn't turn into something overwhelming. It just deepened, like a still body of water where you can finally see beneath the surface because nothing is disturbing it. More thoughts came, not in a rush, one at a time, clear, direct. He thought about time, not in the abstract way people talk about it, but in a very real, grounded way. Days turning into weeks, weeks into months, months into years, all moving at a steady pace whether he paid attention or not. He thought about how easy it was to delay things, to say later without ever defining when later actually is, to assume there would always be enough time to figure things out. But sitting there, in that quiet, that assumption didn't feel solid anymore. It felt fragile, like something that could slip away without warning. He didn't panic, didn't feel regret in a dramatic sense, just a quiet acknowledgement. Time doesn't wait for clarity, it moves regardless. And clarity, it only comes when you stop long enough to face it. The spoon at the next table kept tapping against the glass, a simple, repetitive sound. Before, it would have been background noise. Now, it felt almost grounding, like a reminder that this moment was real, that he was actually here, not somewhere else in his head or lost in a screen. He took a slow breath, not forced, just natural. And for the first time in a while, it felt complete, not rushed, not shallow, just enough. He realized something then. All the things he had been doing, lifting weights, running, trying new activities, they were steps, important steps, but they were all outward actions. This was different. This was inward. No movement, no performance, no progress to measure, just presence. And presence, it doesn't give you immediate results. It doesn't reward you with visible change, but it shows you something deeper. It shows you where you actually are, not where you think you are, not where you tell others you are, but where you truly stand when everything else is stripped away. And that can be uncomfortable, not because it hurts, but because it's honest. He stayed there longer than he planned. The drink in front of him had gone untouched for a while. He took a sip. It was lukewarm now, slightly bitter, but it didn't matter. It wasn't about the drink. It was about the moment. Eventually, he stood up, paid, walked out of the cafe. The street greeted him with its usual noise, its usual movement. Nothing had changed out there, but inside, something had settled. Not a decision, not a plan, just a quiet understanding. He didn't need to rush back into action, didn't need to prove anything. For once, it was enough to simply see clearly. And that clarity, it didn't shout, it didn't demand, it just stayed with him, quiet, steady, like something that had always been there, waiting for him to finally notice. When Min walked out of that cafe, nothing about the world looked different. And that's probably the part most people would miss if they tried to turn his story into something dramatic. The traffic was still loud, the air still carried that mix of heat and dust. People still moved with the same urgency, like they were all chasing something just slightly out of reach. Life didn't pause to acknowledge his moment of clarity. It never does. That's the quiet rule nobody writes down. Your realization doesn't earn you a break from reality. You still have to step back into it. Bills waiting, messages piling up, responsibilities lined up like they've always been. And Min knew that. He didn't expect anything to suddenly feel easier. If anything, things felt a little sharper now. Like when your eyes adjust to the dark and you start seeing details you couldn't see before. He got on his bike, merged back into the flow, and for a while he just moved with it, not resisting, not rushing. But there was a difference, small, almost invisible from the outside, but steady enough that he could feel it. He wasn't looking for distraction anymore, at least not in that automatic way. The urge was still there, of course. Habits don't disappear because you had one quiet afternoon. They stay, they wait. They show up when you're tired, when you're bored, when you don't feel like thinking. But now, every time his hand moved toward his phone without a reason, there was a split second where he noticed it. That tiny pause. It didn't seem like much, but it was everything. Because in that pause, there was choice. And choice, when you become aware of it, changes the way you live, even if your actions don't look different right away. That night, back in his apartment, things were the same as always. Same walls, same chair, same dim light in the corner that he never bothered to replace. But instead of dropping straight into his usual routine, he stood there for a moment longer than usual, like he was waiting for something to tell him what to do next. Nothing came. No voice, no clear direction. Just that same quiet presence he had felt in the cafe. And he realized, maybe that's the point. Maybe there isn't supposed to be a clear instruction. Maybe most of life isn't about knowing exactly what to do, but about noticing when you're defaulting to what you've always done. He walked over to the corner, picked up the dumbbells again. The same ones he had started with. They didn't feel special anymore, but they didn't feel like an afterthought either. Just a tool, something simple. He did a few reps, not pushing hard, not chasing progress, just moving, feeling the weight, feeling the strain, letting his body do something real while his mind stayed quiet. After that, he sat down. The phone was right there, within reach. He looked at it, didn't pick it up immediately, just looked, like he was seeing it for what it was for the first time. Not a problem, not a solution, just an option. And he let it sit there. Minutes passed. Not wasted minutes, just empty space that didn't need to be filled. Over the next few days, nothing dramatic happened. He didn't suddenly become disciplined. He didn't wake up earlier, didn't overhaul his life, didn't turn into a different person. That's not how real change works. It's slower, quieter, almost unnoticeable if you're not paying attention. But the small things, they started to shift. He still went to work, still sat in traffic, still had the same conversations. But sometimes, in between those moments, he would catch himself, catch the way his mind drifted, catch the way his body moved on autopilot. And instead of immediately correcting it, he would just notice. That alone started to create space. And in that space, new choices began to appear. Not big ones, small ones. Like choosing to walk a little longer instead of heading straight home. Choosing to sit without music, without a podcast, without anything playing in the background. Choosing to try again at something he had failed at the day before, even when there was no guarantee it would feel any better. Those choices didn't make his life exciting overnight. They didn't solve his problems, but they changed his relationship with himself. And that's something most people overlook, because we're taught to look for external results. Better job, more money, stronger body, more recognition. But the internal shift, the one where you start to trust your own awareness, your own ability to sit with discomfort without running from it, that's harder to see, and even harder to measure. But it's real, and once it starts, it doesn't easily go away. Min began to understand something that had always been there, just out of reach. Life isn't something you fix all at once. It's something you adjust, moment by moment. And most of those moments don't look important. They're quiet, ordinary, easy to ignore. But they add up. They shape the direction you move in, even when you don't realize it. He stopped thinking in terms of big goals, stopped asking himself where he wanted to be in 5 years, 10 years. Not because those questions don't matter, but because they felt too far away, too abstract. Instead, he focused on something simpler. What am I doing right now? Am I choosing this, or am I just repeating it? That question stayed with him, not constantly, not obsessively, just in the background, like a steady presence. And sometimes, the answer wasn't what he wanted. Sometimes he was still repeating old patterns, still choosing comfort when he knew better. But now, those moments didn't go unnoticed. And that awareness, it changed the weight of those choices. They weren't automatic anymore. They were decisions. And decisions can be changed, slowly, imperfectly, but changed. Weeks turned into months, not in a rush, not in a straight line. There were setbacks, days where he slipped back into old habits without thinking, evenings where he scrolled for hours and only realized it when it was too late, mornings where he felt that same heaviness, that same lack of direction. But the difference was, he didn't stay there as long. He noticed sooner, recovered faster, not because he forced himself to, but because he couldn't ignore it anymore. That quiet awareness had become part of him. And it didn't judge, it didn't push, it just reminded him, you have a choice, every time. And maybe that's the lesson most people miss when they look for change. They think it's about becoming someone new, someone better, more disciplined, more motivated. But in reality, it's about becoming more honest, about seeing your patterns clearly enough that you can't hide behind them anymore. about sitting in that uncomfortable space where you realize you've been avoiding parts of your own life and deciding, little by little, to face them. Min didn't become extraordinary. He didn't turn into a completely different person, but his life, it started to feel more like his own. Not because everything improved, but because he was present for it. Even the boring parts, even the difficult parts, especially those. And that presence, it gave those moments a kind of weight they didn't have before. They mattered. Not because they were exciting, but because they were real. So if you're listening to this, sitting somewhere between one routine and the next, maybe feeling that same quiet question in the back of your mind. You don't need to change everything at once. You don't need to pick up 20 new habits or chase some perfect version of yourself. Start smaller than that. Start with a moment. One moment where you don't reach for distraction. One moment where you notice what you're doing without immediately trying to fix it. One moment where you choose something slightly uncomfortable, just to see what happens. It won't feel like much. It might even feel pointless, but that's where it begins. Not in big decisions, not in dramatic changes, but in those small, quiet shifts that most people overlook. And if you stay with it, if you keep noticing, keep choosing, even when it's inconvenient, even when it doesn't feel rewarding, something will change. Not all at once, but steadily. And one day, you'll look at your life, not from the outside, not through someone else's perspective, but from within, and realize you're no longer just moving through it, you're actually living it. So here's a simple question to carry with you. Nothing complicated, nothing heavy. Just this. When the next quiet moment shows up, what are you going to do with it? And if you don't have an answer yet, that's fine. Stay with the question. Let it follow you a little. We'll keep walking through it together.